I had a dream that you would come here. I dreamt of someone who was on an important journey. Someone who needed my help. I've been waiting here, waiting to help you.
When I was but a wee lad, I played Amazon Trail 3, Oregon Trail 2, and the Star Wars Dark Forces series. And beyond that, I really only got to play third-person games like Grand Theft Auto and sports sims that my friends and family owned. And since I loved seeing all the action and how cool my character looked, I stuck with those games. Until I started owning my own stuff and found that first-person games became the most profound experiences for me. The recent boomer shooter revival of games like Dusk, Eon Fury, and Wrath proved that others also crave these types of fast-paced and immersive experiences, especially amidst a sea of battle royales and open worlds filled with busy work side missions. In this series, we're going in search of the essence of what makes first-person games so great, the FPS essence, if you will, and we'll do so by looking all around the genre's storied roster from our Dooms and Half-Lives to Myst, The Elder Scrolls, Thief, and Deus Ex. We begin our quest with id Software's Catacomb 3D in 1991, which laid the foundation for two of the most important games ever made in Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. We'll take a look at its sequels too, but first, let's make like Marty McFly back to the beginning and see how first-person games grew into the handsome SOBs they are today.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Okay, I don't think we have to go back that far, so let's start somewhere around 1973, 1974. Those years brought us the original two FPS games, Maze, aka Maze War, and Space Sim, a contraction or portmanteau of space simulation. Space Sim's developer Jim Bowery said he'd pay anyone $500 to prove that his game wasn't first. He's never paid out, but anecdotal evidence suggests that Maze was in development first, so we'll start there. Maze was created around 1973 by Steve Colley, Howard Palmer, and Greg Thompson in NASA's Ames Research Center. In the initial build, the player moves in 90-degree increments so you find your way through the maze. Steve Colley recalls that while the team was pleased with the game's quality, it needed something more exciting to maintain interest once players had memorized the maze. And what makes anything more fun than shooting your friends in the face? Or technically the eyes. 2 dots for eyes appeared if someone was facing you, and disappeared once they looked away. If they were looking right or left, a corresponding arrow appeared, and you got 10 points for a kill and lost 5 points if you died. Here's a little high-octane gameplay with graphics that'll fry the jelly in your actual eyeballs.
I got the robot.
You got the robot.
Good.
The score is going up.
Blown away yet? Okay, I kid. But Maze is a big deal because it originated so many genre staples. Maze became Maze War when Colley and friends set up dedicated servers for PvP, and apparently it became so popular that it accounted for half the internet usage in a given month on their servers and was eventually banned. In addition to its pioneering of online gaming, the game also let you bring up one of the first ever overlay maps, and there was a level editor and a spectator mode available too. Maze War's inch-forward movement and first-person perspective was eventually iterated on by the survival RPG called Moria, as well as the Ultima series, which won't be the last time we'll hear that name on this channel. Interestingly enough, the first-person genre influenced a good bit of RPG design space because of Space Sim, the other first-person shooter. Created by student Jim Bowery in 1974 for the Plato Network, Space Sim was as dense as Maze War was straightforward. The game world contained 4 planetary systems and could support up to 32 players, which could be divided into 4 teams called Agstroms, Diffractions, Fouriers, and Lasers, each team piloting a different, unique Star Trek-inspired ship. You could cooperate with or battle other teams as you liked. Players primarily just flew around and shot other players' ships with phasers and torpedoes, but since the Plato Network was a strictly educational platform, Bowery had to make sure his game remained eligible to stay there, so he implemented the first ever in-game text chat where players entered polar coordinates to move, but Cartesian coordinates to transmit their location. Adding to the complexity, Bowery and Frank Canzolino updated the game to require resource management like population count and living standards on your team's planet. This decision unfortunately had the player base who preferred the simpler gameplay, but the update nevertheless established genre norms for games like Elite, Elite Dangerous, No Man's Sky, and Star Citizen. Sorry, I should only reference Space Sims, not Space Scams. Space Sim was named as a direct influence on our next game, which is called Panther, a tank driving simulator created by John Edo Haifeli and Nelson Bridwell of Northwestern University in 1975. Players were divided into team triangles and team squares, and the primary objective was to destroy the other team's base. The 2 bases and 5 mountain ranges would procedurally generate in new configurations each match, so unique, emergent strategies were always required to win. Matches would foster cooperation by allowing players to trade ammo and fuel as they needed. If you'd like to play Panther, Space Sim, and Moria, you can go to the Cyber1 Cybus site and request a sign-on, and I provide a link in the description to get that process started. Panther's legacy is that it smoothed the path for a very similar tank game called Battlezone. Released in 1980, Battlezone used similar wireframe graphics to Space Sim and Panther. The player shoots incoming tanks across an open area littered with buildings, mountain ranges, and an erupting volcano in the distance, which is kind of metal. The buildings were indestructible, and using them as cover was a big part of the game's strategy, though you definitely weren't hiding, as they were see-through. In the original arcade version, you had to look through a periscope while playing, and this prompts some to call it the very first VR arcade game. Battlezone eventually released on the PC in 1983, and it would become known as the first successful mass-market FPS. I actually played this one myself as a kid years after its release in the early 90s, a further testament to its enduring popularity. Our next game, 3D Monster Maze, almost didn't make this list. I'd seen next to nothing about it and didn't really pay much attention to it when it cropped up in my research. Oh, how wrong I would have been to omit it. Turns out, Monster Maze, designed by J.K. Reyes and programmed by Malcolm Evans, is one of the most influential games ever made. Now, we all know bird is the word, but maze was the rage even in 1981. And in this game, you must escape a maze while being hunted by a randomly spawned-in Tyrannosaurus Rex. Yeah, Barney's pissed. The game had no sound effects and relied on text pop-ups to indicate the dino's nearness or state of alertness. The silence is deafening as you traverse the maze. Your eye is straining for the slightest hint of movement or the next text update. You're faster than Rex, but you can't escape a dead end, so plan carefully. I said plan carefully.
Barney, no!
This is a really cool little game that perfected the invincible pursuer trope we saw explode in popularity after Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and it's said to be the first legit horror game ever made. Okay, 3D Monster Maze, I see you, and I'm sorry I almost didn't. And now that this wrong has been righted, let's progress to the next major evolution for first-person games called 3D Midi Maze, developed by Xanth Software and released in 1987 for the Atari ST. It looks and plays a lot like first-person Pac-Man actually, with fluid 3D movement, and discerning viewers will note similarities to Maze War. Most importantly, it was the first FPS intended at the outset for home use, and soon it developed a cult online and LAN multiplayer following, making it one of the very first major internet gaming sensations. Now, the final tank sim on our list today is the most important, and it was made in 1991 by none other than the id Software boys John Romero, Tom Hall, and the unrelated John and Adrian Carmack. They'd all recently left Softdisk together, but still owed the company some games as penance for taking home company computers on the weekends to work on personal projects. One of these games was Hovertank 3D, where you play as tank operator Brick Sledge. You have a limited amount of time in each level to rescue important civilians and fight off mutants and aliens. Once you've found all the NPCs in a level, a little TARDIS-looking thing will show up to teleport you away. As David Kushner notes in his book, Masters of Doom, quote, Hovertank was the first fast-action, first-person shooter for the computer. Id had invented a genre. Now, the speed increase was possible because Carmack's engine would only draw what was directly in the player's view, a technique known as raycasting. Hovertank's engine advancements would actually become the basis for Catacomb 3D and Wolfenstein 3D. So that brings us to the main attraction. Catacomb 3D was the first 3D, or technically 2.5D iteration of John Carmack's Catacomb series, a 2D maze crawler similar to Gauntlet. Carmack essentially used the Catacomb 3 development cycle to supplement raycasting with his take on texture mapping, a technique he'd been inspired to perfect when he saw a demo for Ultima Underworld: The Stygian Abyss. After seeing the demo, Carmack promptly said, I can do that, but faster. And he did. So, is Catacomb 3D fun, or is it mostly a technical novelty? It's a little bit of both, actually. You are Petten Everhale, an accomplished sorcerer who descends into the catacombs to rescue his friend Grelminar from the evil lich Nemesis, the classic Manzel in distress story. Now, like the previous Catacomb games, you'll be killing monsters, finding treasure, and unlocking ways forward by finding keys or blowing up faux walls to progress. You get 4 separate attacks, all of which are accompanied by Petten's hand rising into the frame as you fire, which is a big deal because this is the first time the genre ever acknowledged your avatar's body on screen. Now, the attack you'll use the most is the magic missile, which fires as fast as you can click and has unlimited ammo. The second unlimited ammo option is a charge attack that's too weak for how long the mushroom cloud animation takes to finish, but hey, at least it looks cool, right? The other two attacks you'll have to find ammo for are a rapid-fire barrage of high-damage projectiles and the powerful but inaccurate AoE attack. When not attacking enemies, you'll use your magic as a battering ram to break through weak walls to find keys or the way forward. Now, what really sucks is how walls that can be broken through don't look any different from walls that can't. So you spend a whole lot of game time just shooting along every single hallway in hopes you knock something down so you can move on. The magic spamming carries over to combat too. You'll square off against orcs, trolls, bats, mages, and demons. Now, am I crazy, or do the demons look like the Pinky Demon or the Baron of Hell from Doom? Am I crazy? Am I crazy? No, you're crazy, man. The average enemy isn't a problem, but demons take what feels like 30 shots, a hell of a lot if you ask me. The arcadiness of the action means it's fast, but also super repetitive. The monsters get stun locked as long as you're hitting them, so they only have strength in numbers, but you can work around that too. You can aggro enemies so they follow you through a narrow corridor, and then you can stun lock them in front of it, so nothing else can pass, and then repeat with the enemies that have stacked up behind them. A cool touch though is that Petton's portrait will actually become more skeletal and degraded the more damage he takes. And you'll have to chug a health potion, which always restores all of your HP when drunk, meaning you'll want to wait until the very last possible second to use it to get max value. Because these mechanics are so forgiving, combat's basically just a test of how fast you can acquire carpal tunnel syndrome by attacking, and this really stretches the charm thin. There is a nice spark of creativity later on in the game, and it's when you arrive at a hub area with 4 branching paths that can be tackled in any order. You'll be jumping through portals into the most diverse environments in the game, and it feels pretty epic. I really love it when games try to immerse you in the world through lore-specific, what I'll call business, like when you have to find all the parts of the Big Daddy suit in Bioshock, or when you get Strogified in Quake 4. Now, what I find most compelling about Catacomb 3D is how it solidified the id Software staples of game design: a compelling scenario, a recognizable protagonist, fast-paced action, and innovative technology. This game had a short development cycle and really feels like a proof of concept, but it's still an important kernel of video game history. Now, this is where we leave id until later videos, but don't fret, because we still have sequels left called the Catacomb Adventures to go over. The very first of these sequels was called Catacomb Abyss and was released in 1992 by a brand new Softus team. Curiously, it has no music, and the only sound effects are the clomp-clomp of Petton's footsteps, the crackle of magic missiles, and arcadey bloop-bloop noises when you pick up items. Oh, speaking of items, unlike the first games where treasure only counted towards your overall score, treasure here actually nets you extra ammo for your special attacks, all of which are carried over from Catacomb 3D. What's also a little different from the previous game is the environmental variety. Most areas are smallish and have unique assets, so your surroundings stay consistently fresh throughout. Now, Softdisk also pulls off this simple yet clever trick for lightning by flashing a couple white frames across the black sky texture every now and again to create the illusion there's a storm coming. The overall color palette and asset design is a welcome step up from Catacomb 3D. Now, this freshness extends to the enemy roster as well. You'll encounter trolls and orcs and the red demons from the first game, but also floating eyeballs, zombies, skeleton warriors, shadow creatures, mages that look and shoot fireballs just like you, and many more. Combat mechanics are also much more engaging this time around, and there are a lot more enemies per area, so you'll spend a lot more time strafing instead of just spamming attacks like a turret. Other new additions include magical hourglasses that slow down time and allow you to unload on your enemies while they're immobilized. It's a cool idea, and one of the first, if not the first, instances of bullet time, but it's pretty hard to tell if your blasts are even hitting your targets while in this mode, because they don't really show up much physically until time resumes, so it's not nearly as useful as it could be, unfortunately. And speaking of time, this game is about 1.5 to 2 times as long as its predecessor, so it ends up being about 2 hours, hour and a half, and it ends in roughly the same way as before. You fight, and you beat Nemesis again. Hooray! Overall, the game is a solid second effort and a nice iteration on id's foundation. Up next is Catacomb Armageddon. Nemesis has retreated to the town of Morbidity after his last defeat, and so you'll pursue him through old South American temple-looking places, these golf course-looking areas, an ant colony, and more. Supposedly, Nemesis has access to Time Gate and has called enemies from the future to fight you, but they're all pretty classic fantasy creatures no matter what. You've got these Medusa creatures and these succubus ladies who can suck my butt. Am I right? Just me? Alright. There's also underused but creative enemies like these living trees. I really like these enemies. Once these guys catch fire from your magic, they stop and inflict damage in a wide radius to anyone near them, so you'll have to be really careful not to kill them near any pathways you need to get through. There's also some cool looking green monsters who have several distinct sprites. One's a general pose, one's a blocking animation, and the third has their eyes go red as they take lethal damage and then explode, leaving behind only gory stumps for legs. And the game's just full of personality like this. One interesting wrinkle in combat is that for the first time, the tougher enemies like the two-headed demon cannot be stun-locked, meaning you have to legitimately strafe these guys to avoid getting destroyed. Another nice touch is how they glow blue when they've taken enough damage to die and they kind of phase out, so you know when to stop spamming your magic missiles, so it keeps up the trend there. This one's about 2 hours or so like the previous games, and the ending against Nemesis isn't super creative, but it is a little bit more elaborate than usual. You'll fight a version of Nemesis in each room until you've taken down the last one and beaten the game. You also get this cool little ending screen where you hold up Nemesis's head in victory, a callback to the ending screen of one of the Dangerous Dave games, where he also fights and defeats Dr. Nemesis. Alright, well, last and kind of least is Catacomb Apocalypse. Either petting shit at his job, or Nemesis is one tough motherfucker, as he's back again, this time using time gates to ascend to his future form and bring back futuristic beasties for his ultimate conquest. Graphically, it continues the trend of a couple new environmental textures and some new enemy designs. This is the hardest and most complex of the Catacomb adventures by far, and you'll get quite a different aesthetic experience too as you fight robots and traverse sci-fi environments. Level designs unfortunately lack the imagination of earlier entries. Everything's this metallic gray, and there's one level in particular that just looks like the inside of an RV camper. Some levels do look great though, like the one writhed in flames later on, so it's not all bad, but having played these games back to back and in order, I was definitely a little let down that the series ended this way. Apocalypse's jump forward to the future looks good on paper, but it really doesn't pan out aesthetically. Another sort of annoying new addition is you'll have to find weak spots in the walls like usual, but now there are walls that never break but can be passed through or phased through, much like in Dark Souls. This mechanic shows up in the very first area with no warning or in-game tutorial, which is just mwah. So you'll be gliding along walls for quite a bit of your playtime. They repeat this wall trick so infrequently that it's really hard to suspect when it's the right way forward, too. Now, on a more positive note, the combat's definitely improved and that requires a lot more from you. I died more in some levels than I had in the previous games combined. You'll fight a lot of remixed enemies from the series, but you'll also see the most new enemies of any entry to date. You'll fight lizards, these creatures from the Black Lagoon looking things that turn red and explode when they die, and cybernetic enemies like these Dr. Doom guys, mechs, and floating eyes, just to name a few. They look pretty cool, but they're all pretty strategically the same to engage, and few resist stun locking. The same can't be said for the brawnier types of enemies, some invisible and many extremely bullet spongy. They're the first legitimately hard enemies in the series, and I found myself getting really messed up by them on the regular. The last boss fight's tougher than average for the series, so at least the game's momentum picks up towards the end, even if it's not really the earth-shattering conclusion I might have hoped for. So, all told, while the Catacomb series is hardly a classic, it is a good microcosm of id's signature design choices. A simple but compelling gameplay scenario, distinct avatar, fast action, innovative tech. These would become staples of the 90s shooter renaissance to come, especially id's work on Wolfenstein and Doom. And as many times as I've mentioned Wolfenstein in this video, you might think we'd jump there next, but I'd be remiss if we didn't cover Ultima Underworld: The Stygian Abyss first, the game that inspired Carmack. Blue Sky Productions' game was perfecting its own texture mapping to be sure, but more importantly, it was laying the foundation for the Elder Scrolls series we all know and love. So join me next time as I descend into the dungeons of Britannia. Thanks for watching.